Russian demography, depopulation and migration reshapes Russia. The entire country collapses into two old imperial agglomerations of Moscow and St Petersburg and one new, of Krasnodar. New center of gravity in the south gonna change a lot. Let's talk about Russian demography. As you see, vast spaces in Siberia and European Russia are depopulating. There are two factors behind. First, low fertility. The only places with natural growth are Muslim areas of Caucasus, Ural and clusters of indigenous Siberians. Secondly, migration. Huge areas are depopulating because people are moving elsewhere. Where exactly? Over 90% moved to just 3 locations. 1. Moscow, that large city inland. 2. Krasnodar, Black Sea, near Crimea. 3. St. Petersburg, Baltic Shore, near Finland. In that order. Let's talk of them. The case of Moscow is simple. It's by far the biggest and richest city. Moscow agglomeration alone attracts between 50 to 55% of all internal migrants. All the power's in Moscow, which means that all the money, which means that all the economic opportunities, like in some Latin American countries. Another important attraction spot is St. Petersburg, the second largest city, the biggest seaports cluster, the former imperial capital. Locals usually look down upon Muscovites, considering them too uncouth and unsophisticated. And yet, it's poor, very much poorer than Moscow. Why? Petersburg's been long suffering from unpopular and incompetent governors who don't do the basic stuff, like cleaning the city from snow and ice. As a result, touristic downtown tends to look like this every winter. City center is often impassable, and so on. Some argue Moscow is purposefully keeping St. Petersburg in desolation. Why? Because it's a rival. St. Petersburg is the only city that can realistically compete with Moscow as an alternative seat of power. Therefore, any popular and competent governor'd be too much of a threat. This might be parallel to the situation in China. For the past 500 plus, China had 2 capitals, northern or southern, Beijing or Nanjing. Some argue that for this reason Beijing is purposefully obstructing the development of Nanjing. It's the only potential alternative seat of power. But let's talk of Krasnodar. It's located in the very south, near the Black Sea coast. It doesn't have much of history, architecture, or, as Muscovites would argue, culture. It was built in 1792 as a frontier fort in sparsely populated land, until recently was very small, and yet now it's the fastest growing city in Russia. According to official data, its population increased by 74% for the recent 7 years. Unofficially, much faster, which creates problems, enormous traffic congestions, electricity and water supply, etc. Problems of growth. Why do people move here? First, Krasnodar is the Russian Sunbelt. Let's look at this map classifying climate zones of Russia. It goes from absolutely uncomfortable deep purple to the most comfortable orang, and Krasnodar is the warmest, sunniest, closest to the warm Black Sea. Second, geography. As you see, Krasnodar region, red, covers the entire Black Sea shore. Theoretically, Russia has lots of seas, but they freeze. The navigation across the Arctic is really possible only with expensive icebreakers, which means there are only 3 convenient areas for seaports, connecting Russia with the world ocean. St. Petersburg on Baltic, upper left, Krasnodar on the Black Sea, lower left, and Vladivostok on the Pacific, lower right. Other waters just freeze too much, which is why 3 busiest seaports of Russia are located in these 3 regions. 1. Novorossiysk, Krasnodar, 156 million tons. 2. Ust-Luga, St. Petersburg, 103 million tons. 3. Vostochny, Vladivostok, 73 million tons. But the Pacific seaports like Vladivostok have a problem. They are too disconnected from the rest of Russia. The only real link is the Trans-Siberian Railway, which is now busy shipping cargo from China to Europe. Trains can go as often as every 3 minutes. The railway is overwhelmed. That's why, in the view of economic geography, Krasnodar is uniquely well positioned. It's one of only 3 viable access points to the world ocean, and is located near the warmest sea which Russia has, with best soils and climate in Russia. Krasnodar is highly agricultural. At this moment top 3 farming regions are 1. Krasnodar, 2. Rostov, 3. Tatarstan, but Tatarstan is deep inland, while Krasnodar is on the shore and thus can easily export domestic and Rostov-produced grain. Being located in the Sun Belt and on the seashore, it became a region of heavy government investments. Sochi Olympics, a number of Caesars, the Putin's palace where he spends more time than in Kremlin, they are all located here, because it has sun and the only warm sea in Russia. Interestingly enough, while growing so quickly and attracting huge number of migrants, the region has quite bad reputation. First of all, northerners consider them as Russian rednecks, uncultured rustic PPL. A common slur is Cubanoid, Kuban being the main river of Krasnodar, which can partially result from the ethnic differences. Krasnodar was colonized only since around 1800 and predominantly from Ukraine. If you look at the Soviet ethnic map of 1941, you'll see that ethnic Ukrainians dominate in the region. Consider Bastrikin, chief of investigation committee of Russia. He publicly told to his staffer, a Krasnodar native, "You're not a Petersburg Leningrad man. In the past they wouldn't allow you here and now they do. Go back to Kuban, to your Cossacks. You all just flocked here." Of course that was considered extremely rude and provocative. But what one person will say, very many think, they just keep silence, in a sense that might reflect the attitude of originally St. Petersburg ruling class. The close circle of Putin are all from there, to the southerners, which might be mutual. Anecdotally, a friend of mine, a very Nordic-looking, blonde, blue eyes, girl from Taganrog, which is in nearby region, was teased by her family as Katsapka, being a Ukrainian slur for Russians. Another stereotype about the region is that it's very criminal, and that the entire south of Russia is super criminal. That's not completely wrong. However, the main difference is not the scale of organized crime, but rather its institutional organization and culture. To put it simply, Russia has 2 very different and largely incompatible organized crime cultures: Thieves and Bandits. By the way, here's a nice book with good conceptualization of this phenomenon. Let's start with Thieves, who dominated till 1991. Thieves culture originated in the Stalinist era. The thing about Thieves is that they are very networked, very cooperative and very ideological. Their public agenda is not money-making but building parallel state and institutions. If you listen to Thieves, they don't care about money at all. They care only about justice. And true justice can be found not in the official laws, equals law of cops, but in the criminal tradition, equals law of thieves, which is very much superior and based on true Christian principles. Of course it's cheap propaganda, but the thing with propaganda is that it works. If it doesn't fool everyone, it fools very many. Quite a lot of people sincerely believed they could find justice with thieves who are legalistic and rigorous Christian paladins. If you listen to them, for example, 2 business partners have disputes and come to Thieves for justice. Will you demand payment? No, I care only about justice. But after making a judgment he says, I don't need money, but our brothers in prison do, so you must contribute $100,000. Many such cases. I gave this as an illustration of Thieves' logic and Thieves' propaganda. We are selfless, virtuous men who don't need money. Why do we do crime then? Largely because we need to help our brothers in prison. Sounds stupid? Well, if it works, it ain't stupid. Thieves largely held monopoly on the organized crime all over the former USSR till late 1980s. By the late 1980s, with the Soviet system crumbling and the opportunities for shady business schemes booming, a new culture emerges from almost nothing: the bandits. Unkind thieves. Bandits were openly about money, while thieves developed complex ideology and presented them as the warriors of light, whose sufferings in prison are parallel to the passions of the Christ. As shown in the screenshot below, bandits didn't really care to do that. According to Thieves' logic, these new upstarts could enter the criminal world, but they had to do it by entering existing thieves organizations and doing the long arduous apprenticeship in a hope that maybe one day that could rise. These guys didn't care. What followed next was a pretty brutal fight. Bandits who didn't care about the law of thieves but cared a lot about physical exercise, gunnery and business were mostly winning. However, the outcomes varied over the different regions. St. Petersburg was the place of the most clear and unconditional victory of the bandits, which is reflected in culture, for example in a super popular TV series The Bandit Petersburg. That's not a fiction. Here they exterminated the opposing forces almost completely. Of course there were casualties. For example, Putin's judo coach Osvyatsov, who probably organized his admission to the prestigious St. Petersburg University, was killed by thieves. Translation: The grave. On the grave there's an epitaph: "I've died, but the mafia is immortal." And Russian ruling elite originated in the Bandit Petersburg. See Funerals a Mafia Boss in 2004. They're attended by 1. Zolotov, then chief of Putin's bodyguards, now of the National Guard; 3. Vanachkin, chief of St. Petersburg Police; and Kumarin, 2, the leader of Tambov gang. Also, do you see a guy in a green coat? That's Andrei Konstantinov, the author of the book Bandit Petersburg on which the series was based. He's very well connected and well informed. While the rise of bandits made the devastating effect upon thieves, there were 2 regions where they did beat off all incursions. They were 1, the Far East; 2, the south of Russia, including Krasnodar. The criminal culture of these regions remains super thief style even now. While the Far East is contracting, depopulating and apparently is not gonna make any difference in the foreseeable future, Krasnodar is skyrocketing. So, when thinking of the future of Russia, we should keep in mind that demographic and economic center will gradually drift south, and it will drift to the regions which are 1. Recently colonized; 2. Ethnically different from the heartland; 3. Don't have much imperial legacy or tradition; 4. Overlooked by the state; 5. Looked down upon; 6. Have different institutional culture; 7. Economically self-sufficient. The end of thread.